Well, from the outset, I have an outsider's perspective
Yeah.
because I'm not originally from Carbondale.
Yeah.
I don't think that I remember it as the place that a lot of other people who've lived here their whole lives, or maybe, lived here in the 20th century, have in their mind's eye as an image of this place.
Yeah.
And so I'm fundamentally removed from all of the baggage of that on
Yeah.
the one hand. On the other, I happen to sit on the Citizens Advisory Board for the Jackson County State's Attorney's Office. And so I see not just, how crimes are prosecuted here up close and personal. I'm able to track changes in legislation that affect the way in which crime is prosecuted here. But beyond that, I get access to crime data on a monthly basis that I can then share with my community.
Is there anything that stood out so far?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Variances in violent crime versus nonviolent crime. Right now, we're actually trending, and it's like a trend rooted in institutional memory of the thing, right? So it's not just, as you said earlier, a news blurb.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a headline. It's not this sort of media fear-mongering, which I think sort of sucks the air out of the conversation. I have found, going over the data, that we're probably going to experience in oncoming months a lessening or a dampening on violent crime. And I feel pretty confident in saying that because we're already starting to see a sort of dip here and there. I mean, we have something sporadic every now and again, but it's not going to be like it was. I think that's through targeted prosecuting of pretty serious offenders. And going softer on more nonviolent crimes, really focusing all of our prosecutorial efforts in the county on, making sure violent offenders be made examples of, and then it has this sort of chilling effect on committing a violent act as a whole.
No, and then on the other side of it, right, understanding that the justice system is about providing some sort of forward motion for folks that aren't necessarily an immediate threat to their community. They just happen to be caught up in, an unlawful act that, requires some sort of attention to, remediation of self to a point at which.
Well, it's like, how do you remediate poverty, which is oftentimes what's associated with criminality, There's plenty of money to go around down here, but we suffer deeply from the effects of poverty and a lot of disinvestment. I don't think that those are problems that are not fixable. And going back to the initial point, I think people have an idea of this place and they've seen it maneuver through the sort of throes of life and existing as this growing and contracting thing. However, I think the sort of rap that Carbondale gets as a violent place that, as soon as you graduate high school, you want to leave is just not the case.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is not to understate that what we're experiencing now in terms of, violent interactions is different than what we would have and have experienced for, many decades up to this point. Right. But this is the general change in how violence is transacted in America.
It's the United States of America, right? Well, I think that people who have this sort of myopic opinion of Carbondale are looking at it. It's very hard to read the label from inside the bottle, and some people can just get very bogged down from their position inside of the bottle. But in this way, Carbondale is not necessarily unique. I mean, sporadic shootings are happening all over.
Yeah.
America is a pretty violent place to live. There are all sorts of things that we can do to help alleviate the conditions of violence in our society. There are multiple angles of attack that we could take to sort of solve those problems and build a better way of relating to one another, making people feel like they don't have to pick up a gun to solve a problem.
Yeah.
We set that tone as a society. It's all over the United States that the way in which the United States solves problems is with guns, is with firearms. It's what we teach our children. And it shouldn't surprise us when someone uses or employs that sort of logic because it's standard logic. It's standard operating procedure. We need a different way of relating to one another that's a little more healthy. I think that that's achievable. It's just going to take a lot of work.
That's good. That's good. Because this is kind of the theme on... there we go. On, doing work, right? Always doing work on the podcast, because this is where we, explore interesting people and their interesting lives, and we tie it all back to this little old place we call home, Carbondale, Illinois, for this, the 110th episode of the WTF Carbondale podcast. Clare Killman, thank you for joining and for being listen, Carbondale, this is, we can get through on the other side of this. There are solutions.
Yeah.
There are things that we can pursue and things we can do. And we don't just have to accept things as we experience them or as they are presented to us. We get to have some sort of control over our community.
And its direction, right? One of the really cool things about working on Ray Lindsay's U.S. congressional campaign in 2020 was getting to travel a lot during times when a lot of places were really heavily shut down, Carbondale included. However, going out into the broader region and seeing a lot of other places in southern Illinois, places with more money, less money, varieties of cultures, college towns, places that in many ways could be Carbondale just aren't. We have something very special here that I was able to continually rediscover over and over again every time I came back to it from another place.
What was your first Carbondale experience? How do you first remember
here?
Yeah, being introduced to here.
Oh, well, I was scouting colleges. I grew up in Southeast Missouri, and Carbondale just made a lot of sense. I grew up in what I now consider to be a cult, and I got put through conversion therapy at a pretty young age, as when I came out as transgender and bisexual. And so I made it a mission in order to find safety in this world, to select a place wherein I could cultivate that. And if you just start drawing a radius around where I grew up, guess what for me, the safest place would be.
Yeah.
It's there's this idea that Carbondale is an unsafe place, but for me, it was quite logically the safest place. It was in a state that had protections for people like me and protections for minors that went through something like I went through. And Carbondale was a city that has this sort of culture of generosity, accepting people and their differences, their baggage, whatever they're coming to them with, and keeping an open mind. Those are very vibrant things that we have as a culture. And that was really my first vision or conception of this place. My first visual memory was coming up in the fall because I had gotten into SIU, and seeing the kaleidoscope of colors through Giant City and the Shawnee National Forest, and just sort of being seduced by this place visually. I felt like it was a very seductive experience.
Wait, did you not grow up in the outdoors as was, though?
Sure, but it's no Carbondale. It just isn't. Poplar Bluff, Missouri, sits right on the edge of sort of Ozark forested, hilly, right before you get to the plateau. So it's right on the edge of that. And then it's basically the northernmost part of the delta. So it's all farmland along the Mississippi on the other side. So it's sort of split in two down in the Boot Heel. And while I appreciate the sort of hills and hollers of Southeast Missouri in my mind, it's just not what we've got here.
Very different.
Yeah, there's a je ne sais quoi here. We've got it. We've just got a sort of it factor. We're really pretty.
But it's that it factor feels like it is in everything and everywhere. Like there is I don't know, again, people can poo-poo on the town all they want to, whatever. I disagree, and like, again, ups, downs, and whatever, right? But at least we've got momentum, and at least we're going a direction. Because if you've got momentum and you're going a direction, when you find the end point there and you snap back the other direction, that momentum is just going to keep carrying you.
We also have assets.
Yeah,
it's not like we're bereft of assets. We have so much going for us. We have a thriving small business community. People like to complain about the fact that small businesses are closing up shop or businesses are leaving. As a member of the ambassador committee for the Carbondale Chamber of Commerce, I feel very privileged to get to go to ribbon cuttings for businesses every month, if not multiple times a month.
Yeah.
That are becoming chamber members, and that's not including businesses that open up here that aren't becoming chamber members. And so I truly think that there's a lot of potential here, but there's also a lot of assets to work with and build on. Mm-hmm. We have a university with a bunch of really well-educated people sort of hanging around.
Just hanging out.
A lot of really, really smart cookies.
So you come to Carbondale to, like, as the most accessible place that is for you.
Yeah.
Did you like know going into this that like Carbondale was for sure going to be the place, or did it just kind of like present itself as you kind of made your initial approaches and started coming here for college? And
well, it's a chicken and egg thing. So I had this preformed idea of what Carbondale could be. I think could is a little more accurate there. What it could be for me. And that was not an inflexible arrangement within my own mind. Carbondale can mold and shift in all sorts of ways. It's a very flexible space. Mm-hmm. I do feel like the important things that I was able to see in Carbondale or feel about Carbondale were realized for me. Where I don't know if me coming to this space and assigning it a function created that function. It did for me subjectively. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I strongly suspect that as a function is there for a lot of other people. And so it's independently verifiable enough that I could say it's an objective part of our culture. Yeah. It's just a part of who and what we are.
Just a place to be. to really have and to get to like hold that sense of self.
For me, it was a very soft place to land.
Yeah.
I don't think people who complain understand that there are much harder, rockier places to wind up in this world, especially coming from what I went through. I mean, Carbondale sort of saved my life.
God, it's a heavy feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
and like very real. I mean, this is, and it's, on a much softer way, right? People that go away and come back, or people that come through, go on and then come back, and whatever this place ends up being, that you said that soft place to land, right? That is just so much a theme, right? That at the end of the day, like, You've got Carbondale to come back to. Yeah.
I will evangelize and proselytize on behalf of Carbondale to just about anyone who will listen, by the way. It's like, if we need some talking up, oh boy, do I have a hard-hitting story about that.
Yeah.
You're right. It's not a softer story that I've got to tell, but it's definitely, it underscores that same feeling that I think people engage with over and over again. When they come back to this place, when they rediscover this place, when they try something else and it just isn't what Carbondale is for them. It's not as hospitable, it's not as kind as what we can be. So we can be very hospitable and very kind.
Yeah. The on the survival aspect, and this is just tying back to one of the things that I think is, being an Eagle Scout and having like a whole different set of survival skills to pair with what has developed here in Carbondale for you. I know, right? Just
segue.
I don't know. I thought survival, and I thought
that makes sense.
Eagle Scout stuff.
Yeah,
it jumped right into like the. I don't know. Are there components about, again, just the physical, naturey space? Like, is that where some of your connections with that come from and originate? Is like kind of having grown up in an outdoors space.
So my dad was my scoutmaster. Just got to say that.
Okay.
So
there wasn't really much of a
no choice in
right.
Whether or not I was going to be an Eagle Scout. I learned a lot about myself and about how to cultivate the sort of qualities that I want to see in others, but also be a sense of being, a strong sense of being in it. It was very exploratory for me as a person. It was a really great experience. My father was very much an outdoorsman, where he enjoyed hunting of all varieties, waterfowl, deer, turkey, squirrel, just about anything. Fishing, foraging for mushrooms, grew up mushroom hunting, all that stuff.
Is that something that you really like to share with Ray now?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
The foraging stuff.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. Raymond to me is much closer to like a dad or a grandfather.
Yeah.
Well, he's just a very important person in my life. And yeah, I really enjoy mushroom hunting with him. But I learned from my dad to respect the natural world, that we're a part of it. We're not removed from it. There's no separation between us and it. And I used to hike in the Southern Rockies. I'd go on like 100-mile treks. And when you've got a 50-pound pack on and you're built like I am, and you have to scale a mountain, you just get in touch with your body. And not as this isolated thing, but in touch with your body is this multifaceted and complicated system of things. You learn what you can do, but you and what you're capable of changes based on circumstance. And so then how can you actually really ever separate yourself from the environment that you inhabit? My ability to operate on top of a mountain with its oxygen levels and my ability to see and the weather is very different than when you're on the rainy side and, it might be rocky and wet underneath your feet. Those are two very, very different scenarios, and I'm, completely connected to the ground beneath my feet.
Do you feel that way all the time?
Yeah.
You did. You feel. Well, sorry. That was like a bad joke about like. Do you feel like you're? Do you feel? No. Did I even get it right? like on your feet versus connected through your feet. Yeah.
I don't think that it makes a lot of sense to me to artificially disconnect myself from those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Like, we're all stardust on a floating rock. Not to get super hippy-dippy or existential over here. We're all stardust. We're made up of the same materials. I feel interconnected on an atomic and cosmological level.
It's good. Yeah. This is the kind of place to feel interconnected on a... What did you say? Cosmic and astrological?
No, atomic and cosmological.
Atomic and cosmological. Sorry.
Yeah. It's okay. It's all right. You were there.
I'm trying to keep up, Claire. I'm trying to keep up.
No, it's not.
So you came to school for, you said fashion and design?
Yeah. So I graduated high school a year early, went to cosmetology school, all of these are very selfish, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not going to mince words about just how selfish my pursuits were, especially when I was trying to focus on my survival.
Yeah.
Cosmetology gave me this sort of acumen, the cultural capital around womanhood that I knew that I didn't get. So I needed to get a clue. And cosmetology school was one way in which I was able to learn how our society understands a woman from a visual aspect, from an aesthetic experience, socially, how a woman is reproduced in society and how she's understood. And that was very helpful in the cultivation of my own identity and really honing in on the sort of person that I wanted to be and understood myself to be. Sort of concurrently there, going into fashion design and merchandising at SIU, specifically fashion styling as a sort of specialization, was very much the sort of same logic, where I needed as much understanding of how to be the best at being me. And so I think I was able to get that out of the experience. That was my main focus. It was never really like, I'm coming here to get a degree and then that's going to chart my career. It was more like I needed to figure out how to be myself.
Yeah.
And Carbondale gave it to me in spades.
Well, so. And that is, something that I think folks miss a lot in just this modern university experience, that it's become such the churning out of, okay, well, how do we, enter the system this way and then get thrown out on the other end of it in that way and whatever else. It's like, maybe just, if you're going to go to college so that you can, I don't know, just find yourself. Maybe it's the right place to like find yourself and develop some skills along the way and to learn some things and to take that first step, but like, don't assign it more than it needs assigned necessarily, but also don't like leave out the assignment of additional things that need, attached to it. I tell people, I went to school, for talking, and like I again, similar sense there, that I was able to develop a better sense of self through school, where, by business activity, like I learned from just participation in, the quote unquote real world.
Yeah.
Right. And so I get that component, right. That it's about what can you really do for yourself through school?
It's all sorts of concepts were exposed to me, like aesthetic philosophy, which then took me down a whole host of other philosophical tracks and opened up a series of questions that are yet unanswered to this day. Beyond that, thinking in terms of spatial relation and how things are juxtaposed to one another, applying those concepts to my own body, but also using them and other forms of geometry for my art, which is another thing that I'm deeply passionate about. And, I learned all of that while I was there.
Was this something that you felt like your peers within the program were sharing in with you? Were there other people that were having the same level of thought about what they were doing, and not necessarily in the same exact way, right? But, or do you feel kind of like, I'm part in this, fashion design space, I'm part in the philosophical space, and I'm where the two meet, but there's not necessarily too much assigned to one side or the other by those around me?
I don't know that was the sort of stuff we were all talking about when I was in school. I did make a lot of friends. I would say that everyone was sort of approaching it from their own perspective. And so what meaning they assign to it is ultimately singular in that sense. There are probably people who were approaching it in a similar way, I'm sure. I don't know.
You're like, I didn't ask. No.
I didn't. Again, very selfish period for me. I had a singular focus, and that was becoming a better person.
Well, and you're allowed to, right? And that's a tough part, that like sometimes, right, it takes people a lifetime to discover, hey, I'm allowed to have points in time where I care more about myself than I care about, outwardly, everything else, because I've got to take care of myself before I can take care of outwardly the world around me.
Yeah.
Has art always been a thing for?
Yeah, my grandmother's an artist. I come from a really musical family. My grandmother is a visual artist, and she sings in a bluegrass band, and my grandfather wrote all sorts of songs that got circulated in that sort of music scene. I grew up attending festivals and like painting, and I was never at a loss for supplies of those sorts. Like I was always surrounded by musical instruments. I had a piano, a dulcimer, an ocarina, a bassoon, and I, worked on playing them for a decade or more in some instances. And like my family would always supply me with art supplies. Like I was never at a loss for art supplies. I always had something on hand through which to express myself. And so I had these avenues of self-expression. I was discouraged in many ways from pursuing them as a career path because of a fear of the sustainability of it as a means of financial security. However,
it's because you didn't do enough bluegrass.
Well, like I love bluegrass music. It's very much like a heart language for me growing up in the region that I did. But I don't think many people are making too much money in bluegrass. There may be some. I don't know. I don't see their checkbooks. I don't see their accounts. But no, I was heavily discouraged from pursuing that as a career choice. Funnily enough, now as an adult, I have 3 exhibitions under my belt. I have art in over 10 states and in 3 countries. I have art in Toronto, some hanging in Etobicoke, if I'm saying that correctly, in Canada. I have 2 pieces in Old Sarendon Manor in England. So I make and sell art and ship it off all over the world, which is cool. Yeah, I enjoy it.
What has drawn in an audience, not the immediate audience of peers and familiars that you may have, but like it, from places that you may not expect it, or just like discovery where people have identified your art as art that they want hanging on their hall wall in England, or where did you say it was at?
Old Sarendon Manor.
Old Sarendon Manor.
It is very bothersome. I think I wouldn't consider myself like a good artist. Like I would say that there are plenty of artists who are way better than me, but people buy art from people that they know and people that they like. And so I think it has a lot more to do with who you know and who you are as a person, as a character, than it does actual skill level.
I mean,
sad to say.
I think we could all easily argue that there's plenty of very high-end art out there that you could just go, this isn't good, but people like it because there's a name attached to it, and it is this type of thing, or it is this type of way, and it's all subjective at the end of the day.
Yeah. I always love when someone says, this is very tangential, but like, I love when someone says like, I wish I could do that. It's like, you could if you spent enough time and energy practicing and really cultivating it as a skill. I don't believe in really talent. I think there may be aptitudes, things that you might be naturally better at, but I don't believe that there are like given talents. You have space and opportunity to cultivate certain aspects of yourself, certain aptitudes.
Do you consider yourself a skilled developer? Like, do you look at yourself as somebody who's able to and has spent a lifetime like just developing skills and a way about developing skills?
Yeah, I would. It bugs me when people say, it's like, oh, you're so talented, because it sort of sideswipes all of the, the tremendous amount of energy I've expended at cultivating what I see as a skill. Yeah, I don't think that that's necessarily fair to creatives. So this is my anti-talent rant.
No, I mean, this is interesting, right? Like this is a core like thing about you that I think that I hadn't until you've started to discuss this with me now, but like this is something that you can hang a hat on, right? Like Claire doesn't just have talent, like Claire like works at some shit.
I feel like I have to do my best, very compelled to give life and the very fragile and delicate experience of living that at the bare minimum. I found that if I don't give whatever I'm doing or inclined to do my best, then I'm not just doing myself a disservice, but it really affects me on a psychological level. Like I can't sleep. I feel like and this is all internal, but I feel like I'm not engaged in the process of cultivating a life worth living. And, developing what things bring me joy, bring me passion, cultivating that in my life, really fertilizing and watering that soil and tending to what grows and seeing it bear fruit. Yeah, it's important. It's very important. I have a limited amount of time and energy, so I always say there's always more money out there somewhere. Like, there's enough to go around. There's an abundance of resources out there, be they social connections, financial resources, material resources, cultural capital. There's all sorts of stuff to go around. There's enough for everyone. What there isn't more of, what I can't seem to get my hands on more of, is time or energy. Those are two things that I try to be very judicious with.
Yeah. So. How do you deal with the exhaustion portion of doing so damn much all the time?
I don't judge myself for needing to take some time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be my best self if I didn't allow myself to rest. So I just acknowledge that I am exhausted.
And I lay down.
Allow entropy to claim me until I am repaired, and then I go about my business.
Nice. And if you can you can move everything forward like chunks at a time.
That was
right?
a really I have to underscore, that was a really long-winded way of saying that I am lazy. But I don't see it as that. I find my modus operandi to be efficient. Mm-hmm. Like, if you give me something that is a super complicated task, I'm going to try and conserve my energy, apply what skills I have in the most efficient way. I want to get from point A to point B, mm-hmm. And I want to do it not with expediency prioritized, but like definitely getting the job done such to the extent that I conserve my energy and can rest. So I always want to make sure. I think that's an integral part of what I understand to be my best. Mm-hmm. That, if there's a way that I can streamline a process, I don't like getting bogged down in it. I definitely want to make this as easy as I possibly can for myself and others.
So here's an interesting tie-in to a couple different components. One is like the long tail progress of society, right? And like what it is to, right, try and engineer ways to move things forward, and what it is to, whether you've purposely developed it or whether it's just landed in your lap by happenstance, right? To develop a more public persona, and how the public persona can feed into the expediting of cultural change, and how you can, instead of just being a single cog in the machine, right, be able to spread your mindset to other folks, so that we're all now working on this together, and it's like this has kind of come along in a direction that I wanted it to. And maybe the hack was not working at all of these things just by myself, but working at it in tandem with lots and lots of other people who may just happen to see what I have to say as influential in some manner.
That stuff, I don't want to call it stuff because it's important. That sort of responsibility.
There we go. We're back to the responsibility
responsibility.
Conversation.
That sort of responsibility really weighs heavily on me. I think it should, right? Mm-hmm. The sword of Damocles sometimes hangs heavy over my head. But it's important to sort of take stock of it, where it came from. It did not come about intentionally. I think it may be, as we've sort of teased out over the course of this conversation, the byproduct of a set of logics that I've employed up to this point, which is to cultivate my person.
Yep.
And that didn't stop with, just my transition or just my skills. It definitely bled over as a logic into how I treat people, how I interact with people, how I work a room, my ability to be understood and heard. I don't want to go through. I've spent a lot of life being misunderstood and not being able to get my point across in a way that made sense to other people. And so I highly prioritize that as a way of expressing myself. And I think that over time, one, as I told my story and then I cultivated myself, people, I don't know, just engaged with it or were able to appreciate it. And that feels good. I spent a long time, it's complicated, I spent a long time trying to distance myself from the expectations of others. And when you're like me, and you commit to being like me, I really thought that, well, no one's going to expect anything out of me. If anything, they don't expect me to be here. And that still crops up sometimes, where people always expect me. I thought at a much younger age, it would be, no one expects me to be in a boardroom, right? No one expects me to go to a chamber dinner. No one expects me in those places. It's really inverted in a weird way, where it's like, people don't expect me to love Carbondale. People don't expect me, to hang out at PK's, which, like, those are things that I love, but I always feel like people have these expectations around what I'm doing, where I'm at, and sort of what I'm doing with my time now. And I want to make sure, what weighs on me heavily is how I'm using it.
Yeah.
Like, what am I doing with whatever it is that people have assigned to me? I feel very responsible for what I put out into the world. In a way, I definitely didn't when it all first started, because, again, not intentional. Didn't mean to have it work out that way, but I have had to sort of eat the anxieties around that and just take responsibility for whatever it is that the universe has given me.
Is there any particular set of responsibilities or something that sticks out as like, oh, this is a thing that I'm really glad that this is a responsibility that the universe has brought my way?
Sometimes I think people look to me to solve problems for them. Like, I get messages all the time, like, rental company I cannot name
Okay.
has done so many mean things to me. Can you help me? Or my son is transitioning and they want me to call them my son now. Do you have any resources for me? Or something really bad just happened. Can you help? And I can't help all of the time. Like, there are certain things that I just can't do. However, the fact that people look to me to solve their problems has really grown me up in a way. I felt initially that I was not the right person, and I would distance myself from those sorts of conversations. At this point, I'm sort of ready to just be like, okay, climate change, my responsibility to solve.
Yep.
The moral and ethical dilemmas that permeate our society as residents of the United States of America, absolutely my problem to solve. The military-industrial complex, my problem to solve. All the evils and ills of the world, I might not be able to fix. However, I don't mind at this point taking responsibility for them getting solved to some degree. I think we all should. I think everyone should be living that way. We're like, yeah, what can Carbondale do to fight climate change? They can do everything. They can do whatever we can do whatever we want, you know? We can take responsibility for it. I think, so I am running for city council, so I'll just give a slight thought on governing. I feel very much like the MO of any body of government is to sort of pass the buck. Well, I have this issue with the mosquito abatement board. Well, you're going to need to take it up with them. Well, they told me to come talk to you. And, well, you should go talk to Rick. Okay, Rick, well, you need to talk to Allison over in this department. Well, I talked to Allison. Well, you need to talk to Rick. You know, you get passed around, and it never seems to be anyone's problem. The dilemmas of our time, of this era in human history, never seem to be anyone's problem. And I think we could all use a swift kick and just take ownership of it. Yes, these very macro level, complicated issues are absolutely my problem to solve. That's something that I feel comfortable taking responsibility for, that I am fine to take responsibility for.
No. And it's the idea that if you don't take responsibility, who will? Right?
Yeah.
And you have to replicate that about a few billion times over. Right? Because then that becomes that.
It takes all of us.
Yeah.
It takes all kinds to make the world go round.
And if we are all as one, right? That whole we go back to the stardust, you know, the whole But no, I mean that's a I think one of the things that we have seen as people in their, you know, sub 40s, right, is where who accepts what responsibility where, who becomes accountable and decides like, oh, okay, here.
There's always a scapegoat. There's always an intergenerational scapegoat. There's always an, you know, the other gender, the other race, the other ethnicity, the other. There's always the other. There's always the diametrical opposite upon which you can lay blame. You know, I find people in my own generation saying like, you know, boomers created the sum total of all evil in the world, and you know, there are a lot of problems that came out of that generation, but that generation did not have a hive mind. And there are limited resources within every generation for them to be able to sway every needle. I think, yes, we do all need to take full responsibility and shoulder the burden of whatever's coming down the pipe, because there's no one else. It's all of us. It's all of us or nothing. So,
because if we don't, we'll all just cease to be.
Yep. I mean, those are the parameters within which life, in general, exists. And so, we as human beings, with well-developed prefrontal cortexes, and
mostly,
well, no, with the ability to think and plan into the future. With a sense of self-awareness, and being the only entities that we definitively know of with that sort of capacity in the universe, in my opinion, are responsible for the universe until we know otherwise. And we're a part of it. We're not removed from it.
What did I see the other day? It was like, it was probably Neil deGrasse Tyson. God, maybe it was Elon Musk. Either way, not one way okay, one way not good.
No.
But now I feel like it was Elon Musk. But it was like a pre-total meltdown. Neither here nor there. So the point was, okay, well, what's scary? That we are one of many beings in the universe, and we've simply not, been ran across yet by something else. Or what if we were the only existence of any kind of life out there? And like, what is scarier, the thought that that we're one of many, or that we are one of one?
I think the idea of aliens as another species that exists independently from us on a separate planet, life evolving in a completely separate way.
Mm-hmm.
Until we see it, is just a way for people to pass the buck again. There's some other more technologically advanced society out there that may come in to completely take all of the burden of existing off of our hands in the most violent of ways, or solve all our problems for us.
Yeah.
Right? It's just it's a stand-in for God.
Yeah.
And, vice versa in many ways. I think that there's another logical step that we could go beyond that, which is that when I look into your eyes, I see a third-dimensional observational entity that you're like here with me now, but I don't see myself as removed from you. I see us all as a part of one thing, that you are this thing experiencing conscious awareness in your way and your unique expression of it, but that we are tied together. And so we're all in the same boat. There is no real separation between myself and you. And when you have a terrible day, when you are down on your luck, when there is a homeless person on a street corner, or you see climate refugees fleeing with only what they can carry on their backs, something that I have had to experience in my own way with regard to the safeguarding of my own human rights, I can't help but feel a deep, deep empathy. Because it's me. It's me there. It's me experiencing the effects of climate change. I'm not removed from that. It's me experiencing your bad day. I'm not removed from that.
And in that way, you can be both selfish and altruistic all at the same time.
Well, I would hope that the people in my life also want to see me do well, with the same sort of empathy. We're like, I want to solve these problems. I hope people want, my problems to be solved therein. That, like, we're all made better through coexisting. And I think that's within the realm of possibility. I don't think we're removed from that. I don't like pessimism.
But also at the same time, don't put up with toxic positivity.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, we have clear issues. There are serious problems going on. Not everything's hunky dory. But
don't act like we can't actually stand up and try.
Yeah. Even if the effort's futile, even if you're very nihilistic and think that, like, there's nothing to be done, we can help each other, alleviate suffering. Do it while we look great doing it, just for the sake of doing it. I mean, hell, why not? Have fun. That's huge. I don't care if you fix a problem, just have fun while you're here. That makes the world a better place.
There was I was just as I was pulling in here earlier, was listening to something on NPR about how we have lost an understanding of fun as a society. That we just, right, and what that leaves open to exploitation, right? Like that fun is now a commodity to be commercialized for the sake of
what isn't a commodity these days. Identities are commodities. Yeah, of course, fun's a commodity. Yep, it's an experience that you have to buy and sell in order to get access to.
Yep. Good to know how long some of these batteries last.
You want to pause?
On some? No, I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good. I've just now learned in the moment that battery lasts that long on that light, and maybe yours will go out in the next 10 minutes, but we're safe for the time being.
Okay.
I can see the bar on this one showing as 3 bars, which kind of surprises me, because, well, maybe I just had that light up a little too bright, and the difference between, anyway, neither here nor there. No, yeah, I'm fine. I am still sunk into the screen, look just as shadowy as I did before.
Cut all this out. You have to.
Yeah, I'm no, well, and this is part of why I really hammer in on the twins and about, like, the messaging that they're consuming and what all of this means and what somebody is like asking for from you and why they're asking for it when they do. And it's like, you know, you don't just let somebody tell you what something is and then, you know, try and, you know, extract resources from you because they're trying to bring about something in your life that you may already have plenty of control over and plenty of understanding of, but because it's just as easily commoditized as it is, I don't know, what is the opposite of being a commodity, of being just wholly owned by self, right?
Well, common is
there
all shared, common ownership. It's completely different from a commodity. It's something that we all have access to, like nature. You know, it should be shared between everybody. There's enough to go around. I think what you're talking about is very interesting. It's like the intersection between common sense, critical thinking, and like street smarts. There's like this point of convergence there. That yeah, you have to really. And it sucks that we live in a world like that, but it does sometimes feel like you have to second guess just about everything. Question all things. Trust nothing. Just like that feels very much like you're living in scarcity of honesty, scarcity of honor, even, where you know, people might cheat and lie, and often do. And better to be safe than sorry, and, you know, lock your doors and batten down the hatches because it's going to be a bumpy ride. And it's sort of back to preformation. It sort of preforms the thing when you're living in that sort of fearful state. I feel like it preforms the eventuality. If we're all preparing for something terribly bad to happen, we might just create the conditions for that thing to happen if we all start acting like it's going to happen. But also, it's like, what other way is there to be in this sick, sad world sometimes?
Let me get into the whole, like, you manifest what you put out there. And
I don't know that that's it. It's just like, sometimes you can catch the vibe, right? You can feel what might be coming. You can look out at the lay of the land, take into account the way things have happened in the past, and sort of guesstimate. And if we're all operating on that guesstimation as what's going to happen, sometimes it just does. For instance, it's like if we all start acting like there's going to be a civil war, and you break off into two diametrically opposed camps, and both camps are acting like there's going to be a civil war, guess what's probably going to happen when the tension boils over?
I think that people misunderstand what modern conflict looks like, right? And they think of these conflicts amongst people in a shared state it should look like they did 200 years ago, and that's not the case.
No, I mean, what is a civil war? I've heard people much smarter than myself hypothesize or posit that we're in a constant state of civil war, and it might look much more passive. It might look much more obfuscated than it did. You know, we're not lining soldiers up to crash into each other or shoot each other from a set distance. It's very far removed from that. We've evolved. It might look like the largest prison population in the world. It might look like socially ostracizing someone for being different. You know, that's what it might look like. It might look like, which could just very well be a form of genetics. You know, our society and our generations being poorer than previous generations at this time, and us having less kids, is probably interconnected. I mean, giving people the short end of an ever-abundant stick is another form of social warfare. We might be in a civil war. And again, it's like all or nothing, sort of. It's going to take all of us. Sort of reorganizing, reconstructing, reconceiving.
And what side you're on may not be what side you think you're on may not be what side you're actually on, and what is the real split here?
I think that's probably true for all of us in the way that we're pushed, right? So there are all sorts of, like, I use the word climate change. That in a lot of people's minds is already going to put me in a box. It's probably not an accurate box, but it'll be a box that I'm put in. And it'll either be a red box or a blue box. And just because I care about something, right, I also care about safeguarding people's human rights across the board, along multiple intersecting axes. Mm-hmm. What's the plural of axis? Don't know.
The
axis says that does not sound right. Regardless.
The axles. No.
The axles. No, the... yeah. All sorts of ways in which we partition ourselves off from other people. Another way to look at my concern for a changing climate is simply a desire to see a habitable place for myself and people who come after me to live. And, you know, it doesn't have to be this overtly dog-whistled, politicized thing. It's just, I care very deeply that this place that I feel deeply connected to, wherever we are, the earth, Carbondale, this reality, life, wherever that is an environment that's conducive to a life worth living for people. I want people to be able, and all sorts of other wonderful creatures, to live lives worth living. Like, if that's not the goal, what's the point? And so I feel like in a way it sort of removes itself if you think about it long enough and you don't set up those divides you've been primed since birth to assign people into. It just becomes this other discussion. People are a lot more alike than we give ourselves credit for. And I think the best villains when written are villains that are morally complicated. They're not evil just because. They're not pure evil. They always think that they're doing the right thing. And if you know enough people, which I'm very lucky enough to know a lot of people, everyone thinks that they're doing what's best. They don't know any different. We're all just muddling through. So we should give ourselves a huge break in a lot of ways, and each other.
It's like what Van likes to say, everybody's the hero of their own story.
Yeah. I think it might be slightly more complicated than that. Like, I don't think I look at myself as like a hero, right? I don't think any of us are like heroes, but I think that we're all deeply flawed humans with a lot of good work yet to do, and that we can definitely do that together. I think that the pieces are all there.
As long as we just do the work.
Yeah.
Like, gosh.
A lot of hard work.
Well, and, you know, this goes back to where we were at earlier, right? It's just put in. Just put in. Like, you don't get out if you don't put in.
Yeah.
Like, and, you know, sure, there are some people that just, you know, have the luck of the draw, right? But that's not commonplace. Like, the luck of the draw is not commonplace. If you want to I'm thinking in like the monetary sense, right? But like if you wherever you sit, like you have to put in some sort of effort, no matter what your resource pool is, if you want to get anything out of it.
I think that like even panhandlers are contributing something to society. And I think everyone has something that they can contribute to society. A quadriplegic absolutely has something that they can contribute to society. It doesn't have to be about like there has to be this exchange for survival around physical labor or your ability to expend labor, which is how we operate in a commodities market. Yep. It's no, there is enough to go around already out there. We need to figure out how to, as sustainably, as ethically, and as streamlined as possible, get to that point so that we can distribute resources in the most efficient and effective way and take care of people so that they can contribute to our culture and our society the best way that they know how. And if it's someone who, is homeless and living on the street, whether by choice or by circumstance, I hope that they are able to express themselves and feel as though they are still a valued member of a society.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, right now, classism's a killer. People judge us for being rural. They judge us for being Midwestern. Chicago judges us for being poor. I mean, there's all sorts of things that I would never, ever want to reconstitute. And will probably always be reconstituted in some weird refracted way, no matter what sort of society you build, because as you're building a system, it's always in response to something.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of goes back to like, there can only ever be like the way in which Nathan and I talk for Nathan and I. It's never going to be reproducible, because how I respond to you is going to evoke a response that carries with it the singular dialogue. Mm-hmm. And then it's going to evoke something in you that will then evoke something in me. And so as you see these tidal shifts in society dissolving and reconstituting itself over the whole of human history, there's always a piece of the past carried forward. Mm-hmm. And it's not always pretty, but there's always this sort of refraction of the society we leave toward the society we want to build. And that could be intergenerationally, could be, in the way in which we distribute money, or, look at gainful employment, or divvy out human rights. But there's always some remnant that gets held over because it's a reaction and a response to something. And so just because the dialogue chain is still there, it's happening in this weird dialectical way.
People miss the realities of threats to human rights as they exist right here in our own backyard in the United States. I mean, that really is. I mean, it's just to hear you talk relatively frankly, but at the same time not like wholly in depth about the one-off experience, right, that you've experienced, but to like talk broadly about this and like really understand that like the core of what your work as a person is tied up in just what is right to exist, what is human right, what are human rights. Does it feel heavy to have to feel like that is one of your responsibilities, like that seems to be at the top of the list?
No, that's like the lightest one possible. Because Carbondale's already achieved it. Like, in many ways, we have a long-standing tradition of sticking up for people's human rights.
Yeah.
Civil War era.
I love the plaque that just exists in downtown about the brush building.
It's literally always been a part of our culture. Mm-hmm. We were so situated that we were instrumental in many ways as a region for the Union advance into the South, mm-hmm. and also for people fleeing slavery and segregation throughout, American history. We have been a beacon of the protection of people's human rights all through sundown towns, right? And beyond to this day. I was able to look at Carbondale from the outside and see it as an institution from a distance and know that it was like a lighthouse on some pretty rocky seas around here.
Yeah.
You go to Missouri, you go to Arkansas, you go to Kentucky, you go to Tennessee, and it's a completely different world. You go to Indiana, you go to Iowa. It's all around us, and Carbondale is uniquely situated to serve the interest of safeguarding human rights. Regardless of what your position is, regardless of what your own personal positions are, I think we all have an interest in the safeguarding of human rights, whatever those are. And there can be a huge debate about that, but Carbondale, I hope, will always stand as that, a beacon of people being able to come here and safeguard that for themselves.
And we hope that this podcast can be just a little bit of a beacon for you to see at a distance or up close and personal, whether you're online or here in person, living day to day in this little Carbondale community. Have a good one, folks, whatever that one may be.